Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are excited that so many of you could join us today for our conversation, Notes from a Frustrated Black Psychologist. I'm Pele Shalev, the events manager for the Office of Events at the California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. We may be joining from different places all over the world today, and as a representative of CIIS, I want to start off by expressing our debt and gratitude to the Ramaytu Shaloni, the original peoples and continual caretakers of the San Francisco Peninsula. CIIS campus is located on the traditional unceded lands of the Ramaytu Shaloni, which they call Yalamu. In the Ramaytu Shaloni language, Yalamu identifies both the people and the territory. This acknowledgement is only a single small step towards being in deeper connection and relationship with Indigenous tribes and organizations in our community, and does not begin to acknowledge all the native lands, languages, and territories where you are right now, or where you live and work every day. I invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the land where you reside, and to commit to learn more about the native communities near you, and to support their work. If it feels right for you to share in the chat, please do. We always recommend native-land.ca as a starting resource. Before we start, I want to go over a few general tips and troubleshooting items. We will have a Q&A after the conversation tonight. Please submit your questions at any time using our anonymous web form, which is linked in the event description below this video. We'll be pulling questions from that form, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We do have automatically generated captions for this event, which you can toggle on and off using the closed captioning button in YouTube. Chat will be enabled during this event, but please note that it is not being moderated, and our presenters cannot see the chat. Chat is not required to fully experience the event. If you choose to participate in chat, please be respectful and avoid language that could be offensive or insensitive to others. You can turn the chat off at any time, and we encourage you to do so if you find it negatively impacting your experience in any way. If you're having issues with your audio or video, we always suggest that you start by refreshing the page, and then if you're still having issues, we suggest that you adjust your video settings within YouTube. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, Dr. Siobhan Stewart and Dr. Jonathan Mathias Lassiter, and then we'll get right to the conversation. Dr. Siobhan Stewart is an associate professor in the Expressive Therapies program at CIIS and the current chairperson for the Research and Practice Committee of American Dance Therapy Association. She's a first-generation Jamaican-American Black cis female and able-bodied scholar. She was inspired by her supervisory and teaching experiences to conduct research on embodied anti-oppressive practices for BIPOC students in dance, movement therapy, pedagogy. Dr. Stewart is a past minority fellow with APA's Leadership Development Institute and received the Innovative Cultural Advocacy Fellowship from the Caribbean Cultural Center for the African Diaspora, doctoral dissertation research fellowship from Lesley University, and racial and social justice grant from Antioch University, New England's Applied Psychology Department. Dr. Jonathan Mathias Lassiter is a polymath whose mission is to help others heal and thrive. He is a licensed clinical psychologist, author, speaker, and educator. Dr. Lassiter has been featured on NBC, PBS, SiriusXM, Forbes, and more. His psychotherapy practice is based in New York City. And now it is my absolute pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Siobhan Stewart and Dr. Jonathan Mathias Lassiter.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our conversation this evening. We're here to talk about Dr. Lassiter's book titled "How I Know White People Are Crazy and Other Stories: Notes from a Frustrated Black Psychologist." So excited to have you here with us today and to have this discussion with you. So to get started, we had a chance to meet earlier, about a week or so ago, and I asked Jonathan about so you offered this playlist, right? And I was just so, throughout this book, you talked through music, right? That was really, it sounds like, supporting you through some of these times. So I wanted to start off with the songs that you chose. So I asked him what would be a song that you would want to use to start off our discussion together. And I'm going to ask us if we could just take a moment. You can have an internal focus if you choose. I know it's the evening, so don't go too internal if you don't want you to go to sleep. But to just have a moment to, I'm going to read some of the lyrics from Better in Tune with the Infinite by Jay Electronica. And some of you may already be familiar with the song. So you may also kind of play the song as I'm stating the lyrics, but just take in the lyrics for a moment. And so it's frustrating when you just can't express yourself. And it's hard trusting love to undress yourself, to stand exposed and naked in a world full of hatred, where the sick thoughts of mankind control all the sacred. I pause, take a step back, record all the setbacks, fast forward towards the stars in a jetpack. My feet might fail me, my heart might ail me. The synagogues of Satan might accuse or jail me, strip, crown, nail me, brimstone hail me. They might defeat the flesh, but they can never kill me. They might can feel the music, but can never ever feel me. So I'm curious for you, Jonathan, as you're hearing the lyrics. I know this is a song that's very familiar to you. Um, and I'm curious, one, just why you chose this song as your introduction. I have some inklings here, but and when you are hearing the lyrics, what is coming up for you?
Yes, I do love that song, and I played that song a lot on my internship, my clinical doctoral internship that I write about in the book. And that really speaks to this sense of pushing against what felt like an almost insurmountable force that was trying to stop me from fulfilling my mission, fulfilling what I know is my purpose in this particular lifetime. And so when Jay Electronica raps, it's frustrating when you just can't express yourself. And it's hard to trust enough to undress yourself, right? That I was very much feeling that frustration. And that's one of the reasons why that's the
Mhm.
a title to the book. And then, this sense of exposing yourself. Uh, I think that's something that I cultivate an environment for my clients every day, right? When I'm
Mhm.
working with them
Mhm.
to feel comfortable to expose themselves. And I think that is the way that we all are able to heal and grow is when we feel comfortable enough to expose ourselves, to expose ourselves, to be seen and to be affirmed in the starkness of what is there. And so that just really resonates with me.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and to hear also that it was the inspiration of your title, right?
Mhm.
The song, and I know my speaking Jay Electronica's lyrics may not do it full justice, but the words are just so, are so powerful, and you can feel that level of kind of frustration. Um, so uh, you really cleverly in your book, you you took the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, right? This text that's like, the text across all mental health fields that we use and has this structure. And, as we know, is just the historical, the, the history of this text and kind of the harm, right, that this text has done, particularly to historically marginalized groups. And you flipped the script on them, right? Like you had this moment of like, okay, I want to use this tool, and you give us this diagnosis of what you call the whiteness mindset in this book. And so um, you speak to it valuing individualism, competition, and materialism. And I wanted to know if you could really break down the four categories for us here this evening of that mindset, and then how you just overall how you define it.
Yes. So that was intentional to flip the DSM on its head. And it's sort of um, when I was a professor, I often talked to my students about knowing how to speak to each audience, right? And knowing how to speak to people in their language. And so I really wanted to highlight this mindset that I was seeing in my clients, I was seeing in the people around me, that I saw in myself sometimes, but it had no formal name to it. And so I took what I was seeing and I formalized it into this thing that I'm calling the whiteness mindset. And it's based on, as I said, my lived experience. It's also takes a lot of what's already been written by pioneering African-centered psychologists and scholars in the whiteness studies field to really codify in this diagnostic criteria, because I really do believe that we can't heal from something if we don't know what it is, if we can't name it. And so the whiteness mindset is my way of pushing back against the sick thoughts of mankind controlling the sacred, right? And so
Mhm.
the whiteness mindset is based on three assumptions. So a person with the whiteness mindset sees the world as limited, meaning there's not enough to go around. They see the world as fragmented, meaning it's a us versus them, or divide and conquer. And third, they see the world as from this annihilation perspective, meaning that they must kill or be killed, both literally and metaphorically. And when a person views the world in that way, then they develop a way of prioritizing the values of competition, materialism, and individualism. And if those are our values, then we develop an orientation to the world that both allows for the perpetuation of oppression as well as our silence when others are experiencing oppression. And in order to be silent and in order to perpetuate oppression, we also have to cut off parts of ourselves. We have to cut off our own emotions. And that, again, it goes back to that fragmentation piece. So that's how I'm defining the whiteness mindset. And when we look at the world around us, we see lots of evidence of that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And I think, you really offer us this great frame, right? That then we often talk about just wanting to have a label, first being able to just know what that thing is, right? And so I think you doing that and really kind of taking the shovel out and just like what all is encompassed within this and pulling from um, really African psychology, right?
Mhm.
And these frameworks. Um, I hear you speaking to Dr. Linda James Myers, Dr. Lisa Spannerman, Dr. Kenneth Tyler, George Gordon Leary's work, Dr. George Gordon Leary in social work, Wade Nobles. The book really felt also like a good primer, good introduction into African psychology theories and application, right? Through your lived experience, right? Like not only seeing the concepts, but really understanding the concepts at work.
Mhm.
And so you talk about the whiteness mindset, but then you do give us this outlook on hope, right?
Mhm.
Like, yes, this exists, but like, don't fear. Like, how do we kind of move through this? And I was wondering if you could speak to the seven Mahitian principles, right? As that space of hope. Um, if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so when we think about, and I'm glad that that came through in the book, because you're right. It is my attempt at introducing African-centered psychology to a broader audience in a way that is digestible. And I want to take a step back before I talk about the
Sure.
seven principles of Ma'at to talk about why I think that's so important to introduce African-centered psychology to a broader audience. African-centered psychology, as an academic discipline, has has been studied and researched since the 1970s, right? We have the founding of the first ethnic psychology organization in the United States, the Association of Black Psychology, in 1968. And since then, there has been a multitude of scholars and a whole field discipline of research that, unless you are fortunate enough to be exposed to an African-centered psychologist like I was, you really don't get exposure to in mental health training. I used to tell my students all the time, I say, what you are studying, the, other people will call it psychology. Your professors will call it psychology, but it is not psychology. It is Eurocentric psychology. There are actually psychologies. However, the whiteness mindset is perpetuated in the minds and perpetuated through the work of the powers that be of this Eurocentric psychology, and who determines the curriculum that we all are exposed to and have to master. And that does not affirm so many of us. Those curriculums do not affirm us. African-centric psychology is just one culturally explicit psychology that attempts to do that for people of African descent. And so I really wanted to highlight that. That's why I thought it was so important to do that. Now, the seven principles of Ma'at are based in ancient Egyptian philosophy. And so those principles basically were guidelines for how to live. So real quickly, they believe that some Egyptians believe that when you passed away in your physical form, you would then go on to afterlife, and in that afterlife you would go through this heart feather ceremony, and it would be the goddess of Ma'at there, and you would have to weigh your heart on a scale, and it would be balanced with this feather of Ma'at. And so one of the ways to make sure that your heart was lighter than that feather was to live by these seven principles. And so that's order, balance, reciprocity, propriety, harmony, justice, and truth. And if we lived like this, then we would be prepared to join the realm of the ancestors.
Mhm.
And so I see those principles of my not only about the afterlife, but again about guidelines for how to live. And so I wanted to present those as an alternative to some of the more individualistic psychological strategies that we're often taught about healing. I wanted to take it to a more value center and a more collective communal way, values that really prioritize the interpersonal and the relationships rather than just some internal process.
Yeah, and I think the relational aspect, the communal aspect really comes through within those principles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really comes back to centering, um, within the African psychology framework of centering the family, of the community, and this interconnectedness. So I appreciate you, really sharing that piece of history, because I think it's important as we're going through the next set of questions to really have this kind of understanding both of these concepts as well as the whiteness mindset concept. So through your book, right, you offer us 12 chapters, divided into 3 sections. My life ain't no crystal stair. All I want to do is be a psychologist, and whiteness is a mental health problem. And I feel like, we're given this like developmental kind of walkthrough of yourself as a young boy, right? And going into, now you're, I don't know, like mid-career, right, psychologist. And I was just wondering, was there any one moment or moments where you were just like, I need to write this as a book? I was just curious of when this moment happened for you, because you're capturing all these different moments, but I was just wondering, did something, was there a conversation there? Was there some reflection in a room? I don't know.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So this, I guess what you're asking about, at least the way I'm interpreting what you're
Mhm.
asking about, is the genesis of this book, the
Yeah,
idea for the book.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and so that really, well, one, I always knew I wanted to write a book. I grew up as a book nerd, a bookworm, a huge nerd, always reading. And I have always been a student of Black American history. And so I grew up learning about scholars like W.E.B. Du Bois, right? I grew up learning about Benjamin Banneker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Lorraine Hansberry, all these people. And once I got to early college years, I was introduced to the work of Bell Hooks and Cornel West. And when I was reading their works, what I loved about it was that they had these very deep liberatory ideas that they were communicating in a very straightforward way. And so at that point, I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this one day. Right. And so I didn't know exactly when I would do it, but I knew I wanted to do it. And I knew I wanted to do it about mental health because I felt like that was my calling, because I had seen the effects for my family and myself. And once I started learning about mental health for Black communities, I was like, this is what I want to do. And so it wasn't until though I was on internship and at the Indianapolis VA, and I write about that in the book, and was experiencing just racism, right? Just
Mhm, mhm.
experiencing racism and going through these health problems as a result of the racism, stress
Yeah,
has
yeah.
a very negative effect on our bodies, and I was feeling a lot of that. And however, at the same time, I was reading a book by Toni Morrison called Whiteness in the Literary Imagination. It's one of her nonfiction books. And basically, in the book, she was going through and she was looking at all the images of Blackness and whiteness in early American literature. And so I said, oh, I think I want to do something like this with psychology, because
Mhm.
again, all the psychology, and I'm an A student, so I knew those
Mhm,
theories, right?
mhm. Yeah,
I
yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
half stepping on the
Mhm.
theories. And so I was like, I wonder how Freud and Jung and all these people think about Blackness, think about whiteness and culture, and what does it mean? What does Abraham Maslow think about these? And so I wanted
Mhm.
to start to do that. And then that took me to critiquing the curriculum that I had been exposed to,
Yeah.
which again was a very Eurocentric, culturally narrow curriculum that was presented as universal. And I think that's my real gripe,
Mhm,
is that
mhm.
if you want to do a Eurocentric psychology, cool, but make sure you are
Call
applying
it
it
that.
to that group.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't
yeah.
then say, don't take the Eurocentric off of it and say
That
it's
is correct.
psychology and make it universal. That's where we run into harm. That's how
Yeah.
harm happens. And so so after reading Toni Morrison's book, I wrote an essay called Whiteness in the Psychological Imagination. I published it on a website for a think tank. And that was sort of it. And then I graduated, went on about my postdoc. And I did an academic book, a co-edited volume, Black LGBT Health in the United States, with a colleague, Dr. Lawrence Follins. And then I, got into academia, became a tenure track professor, and, went down the path of peer-reviewed articles, because that's the currency there. But again, this idea to do a book was always in the back of my mind. And so eventually I had, got a little bit of, I felt like I had enough emotional space to say, okay, I want to revisit this book idea. And so in 2020, during the pandemic, I said, I want to revisit this book idea. And I was like, I wanted to be on New York Times best-selling list, right? And so that was my goals have changed now. But at that time, it's like, I wanted to be a New York Times bestseller. And so I asked Google, how do you get your book on the New York Times bestsellers list? And Google said, well, you have to have an agent first. And so I asked Google, how do you get a literary agent? And so that really started me on my path. And it was my agent, big shout out to CC Lyra, who is my literary agent extraordinaire. I really, really am so grateful for her. It was her idea to not have it be so academic and to be more of this format of stories. She said, you have such an interesting life. How about you explore these things through these stories? Like what were the lessons you learned? And so by thinking about the lessons that I had learned that I wanted to share with a broad audience, I thought of the stories that illustrated those. And then that whiteness mindset criteria came to me, and I said, I want to explore this through stories. And it was very important to me to make sure that those stories were very much vivid, using a lot of descriptive language to really highlight the imagery, and also emotionally provocative. Because as mental health providers, we know that it's when we get to the emotion that people can then start to heal and grow and change. And so I wanted to do that with the work.
Yeah, yeah. And I think your intention comes through, right? In the book with each chapter, right? You really, I think, kind of demonstrate these parts. And so I think my next set of questions is just kind of walking us through. You're giving me good segues to go into my next questions. Thank you. But in My Life as a Crystal Stair, you speak to one of the things you speak to is really early on having this diagnosis of sickle cell, right? And really, what I felt was like a juxtaposition with kind of this. You give us this history of your father, right, growing up in the South, and you growing up in Georgia, and you talk about this internalization of the whiteness mindset. And at one part, you say, "My father valued protection and strength, and I was more drawn to the world of fantasy, arts, and emotions." And I was just wondering if you could speak to this idea you mentioned of cultural misorientation, and how that was, you feel like, emerging within your relationship, for you and your father.
Yes. So, yeah, so you're right. That first part is really like the background, right? Again, the stories that I share are very personal for my life. And I really wanted to start at the beginning. And the beginning for me, again, very much an African centered way of thinking, is our ancestors. And so I wanted to start with my grandfather and his story, and my father and how that influenced me, and then move from there. And so that "My life ain't been no crystal stair," that is a line from a Langston Hughes poem
Yeah.
that I grew up loving called Mother to Son. And so in that, I wanted to, in that very first chapter, you're right, I said that he valued protection. And I was much more about the internal world, emotions, arts, and imagination. And it's true. I think that given the context of my father and his upbringing, again, he was born in 1955. His father born in 1920s, I believe. And so, that's a very different world that I was born into. I was born in 1983 in Georgia. My father's born in the 50s in Georgia. His father, decades before that in Georgia. So those are very different time frames, and the context is so different. And so my father was born into a world of blatant racial violence and pain, and he and his father really had no recourse. There was no hope for justice. At least, I mean, we still have a lot of racial violence and things like that. However, at least we still have a hope for justice. There's some sort of
Mhm.
formalized process that we may get some justice. Of course, people still being acquitted of stuff,
Right,
but that's
right,
a whole nother
right.
story. But that wasn't even the case for him, right? So in order to protect himself and his family, he said, okay, you gotta be bulletproof. You have to be impenetrable. You can't ever lose your top, and you can't ever show weakness. And that was his thing. And I relate that to cultural misorientation because that is one of the upsetting things about the whiteness mindset, is that it really strips people of their humanity and calls that inhumaneness desirable.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is that my father thought that not having emotions was a desirable thing. He thought it was a strength. And that's not true at all. And from an African center point of view, we actually know that there have been several African communities. I'm thinking about the Dagara tribe right now,
Mhm.
that really looked at gender and the role of men in this case as much more fluid, much more vulnerable, and strength was more holistic than just no emotion.
Right.
In fact, strength was being able to show up as oneself authentically in all of our emotions. And so that's the cultural misorientation. My
Mhm.
father and so many generations of people of African descent, the descendants of those enslaved Africans, lost their connection to their original culture and was misoriented towards this Eurocentric ideas of what masculinity were.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm hearing you as you're speaking, really speaking to like the sense of vulnerability, being able to be vulnerable, show yourself, being transparent in what's happening in the process as strength, right?
Yes.
Um, so yeah, yeah. So eh, there's another moment where you speak to the whiteness mindset within the Black church
Mm.
setting and who God wants me to be, right? And at one point you said, I think I was just struck by these two statements. We went to Black churches to rinse the residue of whiteness off of us each week. This cleansing was somatic, rhythmic, and melodic. And I think I was curious, like, because you're talking about this from, Black Southern Church, and I'm imagining then this is like mid 80s, 90s, like, I was curious now, just where do you feel like these spaces exist for us today? um, where do you see that within our contemporary, I don't know if contemporary, but just today in our world, like these spaces, because yeah, it just brought that thought to my mind.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And I feel like those places are few and far between now. I feel like they have been systematically stripped away from us. People are still going to church. It's not at the numbers it used to be. And church has also has become more of a tool of capitalism than it has been in the past. And so that's also turns a lot of people off from church and other religious organizations. And I think for um, for Black communities, for some folks who weren't in church, nightclubs and things like that used to be that communal space. However, now it's hard to find a space for Black and brown and melanated people to congregate, right? And so it's really hard to have those those spaces anymore. And so I really don't know of communal spaces. I mean, besides maybe online, but
Yeah.
in-person communal spaces, I think those are few and far between. And I think that is a that equates to a lack of resources for us as a community. I was having a conversation not too long ago, and someone was asking, are we our ancestors? You know, that's a common, a popular saying among some Black folks, like we're our ancestors. And I said, I don't think we have the same tools and resources our ancestors had. And one of those being these spaces to congregate and to be in our bodies, to be in the music, to be expressive, and to really let go in a safe space, in a communal safe space. And I think
Yeah.
that's a real detriment to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And um, I think just in hearing you say that, it's bringing. So I'm a fan of Janet Jackson, and I saw in the book that you mentioned at one point uh, doing choreography, like you were doing choreography to Janet Jackson, and there are these little moments where you talk about dance, right, and music, and I was just wondering about, when you're talking about this, being able to really express yourself and having these spaces. I was wondering about the role of the arts for you during this time, right? And what art practices you were using, if you can, if you've held on to those practices, or have they shifted over time?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, can you
Yeah,
still hear
yeah,
me okay? Okay,
yeah.
great. Okay. Yeah, so again, this goes back to our roots, right? As people of
Hmm.
African descent. As people of African descent, there really is no separation between mind, body, and spirit, right? All of these things were the same. We embody our health in our rhythmic foot tapping, in our dance. We invoke the spirits through our voice. We healed each other through the vibration of our humming. So none of these things were
Yeah.
sort of like performative,
Hmm.
and they were not uncommon. And so for me, without even knowing it, right? Those expressive ways of being have always been important to me. I grew up as a child listening to, 80s and 90s R&B and pop music and things like that, right? So I've always been had a affinity for music that was expressive and people that can sing, not
Yeah,
sing.
yeah, 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 yeah.
There's
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
difference, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I've always loved to dance. And when I went to high school, I started to train formally in modern dance and jazz dance and African dance and hip hop. And so you're right. I eventually started teaching dance as well. And yeah, that Janet has always been one of my favorites. I remember when I auditioned for my fine arts high school, I auditioned with the Pleasure Principle dance. So yeah,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
so
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
but these things again are not just for the stage. They are they are tools of being. They are tools of connection. They are tools of healing. And I think unfortunately we moved away from that.
Yeah, yeah. And um I think there's a part of me as I'm hearing, right? These are all things that are very much embedded, right, within our culture,
Mhm.
and over time we've and really in this kind of Eurocentric Western mindset, they get separated out. And I was wondering about how you use the arts to support you in navigating the whiteness mindset, right? Because I hear it. I feel like I hear it in your book when there are these moments of talking about dancing out some of the stress that you were feeling. Um, and so I don't know if there are any other moments that you care to share of how you use the arts. Or...
Yeah, so again, from my own personal well-being, I use it all the time, right? I'm dancing in my kitchen, I'm singing in the shower, all of these things, right? In my professional practice, that comes out through a very intentional focus on the body. One of the first things I ask my clients in each and every session is, where am I finding you emotionally right now?
Mhm,
And what I mean by that is not just a verbal label, but I break it down for my clients. I say, I want to know what you're feeling in your body. What are the bodily sensations? I want to know what thoughts you're having. And I want to know that emotional label. I want to know all of those. And again, sometimes clients don't have a label. And it's even becomes even more important then to go into
mhm,
the body. Okay, so then tell me what you're feeling about. Well, and sometimes people, because of our capitalist society that so much focuses on the external, sometimes people don't know how to get in touch with their body. So I find myself doing body scans or doing imagery work, right, with my clients to help them really get into this embodied space
mhm,
that roots them into a process to open up the pathways for healing. And so that's the way that it comes out, and I try to use it intentionally in my current clinical work. There is, and on the horizon, I see a much more an expansion of that work to include more rhythmic use of dance in a traditional way that I use it at home. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to co-facilitate a workshop with one of my college friends who is now a mental health colleague, and we did a whole workshop where all we did was put on music, and I asked people to just move and dance to however they want to move and dance.
mhm,
And
mhm,
then we processed, okay, what was that? What did you get from that? What's happening for you right now? Is there anything you want to share? Maybe there's nothing you want to share, right? And then we would go to the next song. And I would just say, just let the song minister to you. Let it dictate what your body does. And at the end of that workshop, people were speechless because they knew that they had had a real healing experience, but it was something like they had never experienced before.
mhm.
And it was something that was hard to describe. It's like, I know something happened, but I don't know quite what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's what true healing really is. I think, in Western society, we're hyper verbal, but we don't always need all of that.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing, right, your professional practice and how that comes out within your work. I really, as I hear you speak, I was like, it sounds like expressive arts therapy. It sounds like DMT, welcome, right? Welcome to this side of the world, right? Healing. But that's, that experience. And I wanted to this take a moment to come back to you offer us like several moments of really also seeing how the whiteness mindset comes up within your postdoctoral work coming into San Francisco and really entering into the LGBTQ community there, and also this kind of intersection of what it means to be a Black gay male living in San Francisco, as well as interacting with different racial and ethnic identities, right? Specifically highlight um, interacting with the Asian community and kind of talking about, I think what I was hearing as, um, well, actually, I think you said it best, so let me not paraphrase, but whiteness mindset can be internalized and perpetuated by anyone, regardless of their racial or ethnic identity or appearance. Um, this mindset has convinced some people of the global majority to scapegoat other marginalized groups from the global majority as the cause of to their disadvantage. Um, yeah, so I'm just wondering, I guess the question is there, can you talk more about how the whiteness mindset was impacting you at that time?
Yes, so I'm going to take you back. I'm going to take
Yeah.
you back to 2008. And I'm moving from New York. I had been in New York the year prior, um, doing AmeriCorps, Volunteers in Service to America. And I was doing health education at a hospital up in the Bronx. And during that time, I applied to graduate school, I got in. And so I was going out to San Francisco to attend the California School of Professional Psychology. And I'm so excited. And my dream is coming true. I'm going to get to be a
Mhm.
psychologist, right? And this is the first step. So I'm so excited. But first, I have to find a place to stay. And so I'm staying with a friend of mine, a college friend of mine. And he had moved there the year prior to do an MFA program at the University of San Francisco. And so I'm staying with him while I look for housing. And I go to my first appointment. Well, back up just a little bit. So I was using Craigslist to find
Mhm.
housing.
Mhm.
And so I'm calling people, hi, I'm a doctoral student. I'm looking for housing. Here's my budget. I see that, this is what you're charging. I would love to come by, see the room. Oh, you're going to be studying. What are you studying? I'm studying psychology. Oh, that's so great. Come on by. Come on by. Um, and if you like it, maybe you can move in tomorrow. All of these very encouraging, very encouraging. So I get on the Muni and I go out and I get to my first viewing appointment. And I'm ringing the doorbell and there's no response. So I'm looking at my MapQuest directions because it's 2008, so it's
Mhm. Mhm.
MapQuest. I had printed them out. I'm looking at my MapQuest directions. I'm like, this is the address. And I ring again, and someone peers out and they say, "What do you want?" And I said, "Oh, I'm Jonathan. I called. We talked on the phone. I'm here to see the room. No rooms available." Slam the door in my face. I'm like, huh? I know.
Mhm.
Again, I'm looking at MapQuest address and looking at. So I don't think anything of it. I just think it's a weird fluke. So then I go to the next place. Hey, I'm Jonathan. Oh, you're Jonathan? Yeah, I'm Jonathan. We talked on the phone. Oh, the room's been rented. Okay, wow. Well, things happening fast out here. I guess it's San Francisco. Um, I go to my third appointment. Oh, you're Jonathan? And at that point is when it clicks. And I said, oh, this is anti-blackness. So they knew a person named Jonathan was coming. They did not expect that person to be Black.
Mhm.
And it really hurt me because everything I had been told about San Francisco is it's so liberal. Everyone's welcome. And not only was I being discriminated against, I was being discriminated against by people from the Asian communities. And I don't want to overgeneralize, but these people who I was going to rent a room from, they all happen to be Asian. And so I was being discriminated against by people from the Asian communities who, in my mind, again, that term POC, right? We're people of color. Well, we all experience racism, right? We should be allies. No. And so what that taught me was that there's a pecking order. And to some of the people from the global majority, I use that term uh, intentionally because globally speaking, melanated people are the majority. The people from the global majority look down on other members. And oftentimes it is Black people, it's people of African descent who are at the bottom of that hierarchy. And it really, really hurts. But I think, again, that goes back to the whiteness mindset that tells these people there's not enough to go around. So if you want access to these resources, be like us. And that us is the white people, right? Don't be like them. However, though, being like those white people, one, you're never going to be like them, right? They're never actually going to accept you. But that's taking you further away from your culture rather than if you embrace your culture and embrace community with people who actually share more of your interests. And it's interesting because as a professor, I've had several students of a lot of different backgrounds from people of the global majority, whether that's from Pakistan, Vietnam, Chinese, etc. And they have told me openly, yeah, in my country, Black people, they're thought of as lazy, not valuing education. I had one of my doctoral students share with me, and I was glad she shared it with me. I wasn't offensive, but she said she was a Pakistani woman, and she said, "My mother was concerned about me studying with you. I have a PhD and I'm well published. Why is your mother
Right.
concerned about
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
studying with me?" Right? So it's that internalized whiteness mindset that it's phenotypically promiscuous, to borrow a term from Cornell West. It anyone can be infected by that mindset and perpetuate it, and it's a shame. It's a shame because again, it that's that divide and conquer, and it leaves us all oppressed.
Yeah. And it's really, as you said, that scarcity mindset, right? And so I think I shared with you, I had a very similar experience when I was out there and I was like, oh, this is, um, this feels um, pervasive, right? And so I have, we have just a few more moments left. I have, I think, two more questions that we can get to. And one is, you made reference to this earlier about your internship and being out in Indianapolis, and really, having this moment of one where um, the, you didn't get the internship right away, right? And then you got the internship, and then you just had this moment of being asked to do this diversity project, and then you were asked to redo the project, and um, you speak really to the impact that had on your physical and mental health, and stress. And I just was curious if you could maybe speak to this for um, about, I feel like this is something that many students from the global majority experience. And what were ways for you of, you know, we know that you've made it, right? You have, but
God, yeah.
through that, like what were you doing to really support your physical? Like, what were the supports that you had? What were the supports you wish you had? Like, um, that level of stress is something that's very common, I feel like, for many students. So,
Yeah, one of the things that I've been so grateful for, I talked about originally hoping to be a New York Times bestseller. And don't get me wrong, I still welcome that. However, what's my focus has really shifted to the book reaching the audience that will that it will benefit,
mhm,
that it will touch. And in that regard, I've already had so much success because I have so many people emailing me, DMing me, saying, I feel seen. Oh my God, thank you for writing this. Someone
mhm,
said it is intoxicating in its honesty,
yeah,
right? Because this is, as you said, the experience of so many people from the global majority, and especially Black people, right, who are trying to get an education. And isn't that a shame? We're just trying to get an education. We're not doing anything else.
yeah, right,
We're trying to
right.
get an education. So, yes, so I really did not have any supports for my mental health and well-being while experiencing so many overt and covert racist attacks
Mhm,
on me while I was there. It was environmentally racist because it was just out of probably a department of 20 psychologists.
mhm,
There was
mhm,
one Black woman. And I think she was the only melanated person there. And in my cohort of three of us, it was a small cohort, there's two white women and then myself. So I'm already isolated just environmentally. And really the only sort of source of connection of community that I had was with people who worked in the cafeteria, janitors, you know, and they would and nurses, and they would always be so happy to see me coming. And they'd be like, "Oh,
mhm,
hey, how
mhm,
you doing today, Jonathan? Yes, Jonathan's, you know,
mhm,
Jonathan's in the doctoral program. You know, they were so happy and proud of me, and I think maybe that was something that helped me hold on. But outside of that, no, I
mhm,
think my response was to just what my father wanted me to do, toughen up and
yeah,
push through. And I think that's because that's what I felt that was the only option I had
mhm,
because I did not feel that they really cared about me, even though they were saying it out of their mouths, but none of their actions said it.
yeah,
And I wish that I would have had at least one other person from the global majority who could have been an ally, who could have went to bat for me. That's one of the
mhm,
things that when I was a professor on the doctoral program, I was adamant about go. I was ready to go to war. I think Vince Staples has a song called "War Ready." I was war
mhm,
ready. I was
mhm,
like, "You not messing with none of my students. It's not happening.
yeah, yeah,
Like you could fire me, but we going down fighting." And I wish I had had that. I wish
mhm,
I had had someone to say, "Y'all need to change this training curriculum. This is too Eurocentric. Who is
yeah,
this supposed to serve?"
yeah,
But I didn't have that. And I suffered. I was in and out of the hospital. I already have sickle cell anemia, and stress is horrible for sickle cell anemia because it makes you more susceptible to pain, excruciating pain. So I was in
mhm,
and out of the hospital going to see my doctor that year. And I was having panic attacks and didn't even know it. It was a really hard year.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I'm hearing that through it, right? That you kind of you've what you've learned from that is who you want to embody, right? And being a mentor and support to students and I imagine perhaps also for clients if they're coming in with these similar experiences um, and finding the strength, right, in that way. Um, when we're talking about really our ancestors and gathering and being vulnerable and sharing that. And um, yeah, I guess as we're looking at shifting and closing out, I'm just thinking back to kind of what we talked through today. And as I'm reflecting on this book, you really are embodying the strength, right? Like as you're sharing these stories, that vulnerability, it really comes through in a way that I, as you're speaking, that many people can relate to who are going through training in psychology, in expressive therapies, in counseling, like just being of the global majority and having frameworks that may not represent who they are, who their clients are, right? Um, so when I going back to the song, uh, we were talking about how you wanted to end, what song you wanted to close out with. And I know I'm not going to do Lupe Fiasco justice. Like, I have the lyrics here. I have the lyrics here. I'm going to read it. But, I do encourage you all to, if you don't know this song, The Show Goes On, to YouTube the song, to then listen to it so that you have a fuller sense of how he is embodying the song. But Lupe says in one part of the song, so no matter what you've been through, no matter what you into, no matter what you see when you look outside your window, brown grass or green grass, picket fence or barbed wire, never ever put them down. You just lift your arms up higher. Raise them till your arms are tired. Let them know you are here, that you're struggling, surviving, that you're gonna persevere. Yeah, ain't nobody leaving. Nobody's going home. Even if they turn the lights out, the show is going on. And when you hear that, I mean, I think you need to hear it with all the instruments and all the liveliness of the music video. But when you hear that, um, the same question, like what comes up for you and why you wanted us to close with this thing.
Yeah, because that's our story. That's our story as people from the global majority. That's our story of people who have been harmed by the whiteness mindset. That's the story of people who, in some ways, are even benefiting from the whiteness mindset. They too are also being harmed by it as they benefit from it. The path of growth and healing, which is as healers, we have accepted as our journey. It is a journey of getting up and trying again. It is a journey of being hurt and using that pain to push us forward. It is a journey. It is a journey of persevering. That's why I love that song so much, because it really, really speaks to that journey. And in that journey is triumph. Every time we take a step forward, we are winning.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that for us.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Let's take that in for a moment. So we have now's our time to open up for the Q&A. We have some questions coming through, and let me start us off. We have a question here that says, you mentioned that there has been a shrinking number of community spaces, like churches and nightclubs, for melanated people to congregate. Could you speak to the role that community plays in combating systemic oppression and the whiteness mindset?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a whole field of study that looks at community, and we have a whole history of collectivist societies and how that fortifies people. But yes, community is essential. I mean, if we even look at the history of Black Americans in the United States, I mean, it was a community that fought for civil rights. It was a community after the civil rights movement of Black Panthers who were feeding children in Oakland and other places. It was a community of people who were, I don't know if you had this program called Feed a Kid, and it was like a program at churches that during the summers for children who didn't have food, they would provide lunches and things like that. I mean, it's a community. It is through communities that it actually, now that I think about it, I think one of the attacks on community and the push for individualism is because it really supports capitalism. Because if you are a community, you are never lacking because what one has, you have, and what you have, others have. That's the sense of community. And so, how do we combat systemic oppression? We combat it in community. We combat it through teachings. We combat it through collective activism. We combat it through support groups, emotionally expressive gatherings. It's so many ways in which community can be helpful in combating systemic oppression.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it even leads me into like thinking about, supporting businesses of like the global majority, right? Where we investing our money and time and space into. So
100%. Yeah, I'm looking for like Christmas scented candles, and I'm like, I wanted like gingerbread and vanilla is particularly, but I was literally looking. I was like, I want to support a Black-owned business, and I found a Black woman-owned business, so I'm going to go to get those candles this weekend. But those things are not small things, That's how we overcome. Bit by bit.
So we have another question. Who are some of your favorite African and non-European scholars? Do you see any connections across their psychological theories, right, in response to oppression and colonization?
Yeah, so is it John Mbiti, I love, who is an African historian. Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Linda James Myers, Dr. Cheryl Grills, Dr. Kobe Cabone, who is he coined the term cultural misorientation and really studied that construct. Dr. Bill Cross, who came up with the Black racial identity model. Dr. Joseph White, who is known as the godfather, if you will. Hold on, sorry.
We can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. I think my headphones just died, so sorry about that. And I think the recording stopped too, so sorry. Just bear with me as I figure this out.
Yeah, so as we're just taking a moment to pause, as we're working through just some audio.
Okay, I have it now. I have another film recording. So all of these are scholars. So I actually used to teach a class on African-centered psychology at both institutions I used to work at. And it's a whole, you could do a whole 4-year program on this. So I don't have time to go into that. But Google some of those people that I talked about, and you will find a wealth of knowledge. And what you will find that I think is so heartbreaking that we're not exposed to is that this goes back decades. And in some cases, when we get to the African continent, millennia, and we're just never exposed to it, and that's a shame.
Yeah. It's something that you really have to want and search for with intentionality, right? And so,
I often say that I got two PhDs because you're right. I was learning Eurocentric psychology in my program, but I sought out and I studied with a passion and diligence and
mhm,
intention African-centric psychology as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of the extra, double the work, right? Is what's
Yes.
coming to mind.
But just
But
a
it's good
quick
work.
point. Yeah, it's good work. And just a point. This is why I used to tell my students, again, I always made it a point to make sure that I was accepting um people from the global majority into the PhD program.
Mhm.
And they used to say, they would come in and they would find my lab as a place of empowerment and respite, but they would say, "Oh, I feel insecure, imposter syndrome, and things like that." And I would say, "Don't ever feel like an imposter because guess what? You know their stuff and the cultural psychologies. They only know one thing. They only
Mhm.
know one thing. So I never ever felt insecure because I was like, you're the one that's limited, not me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What a great reframe, right?
Yeah.
So, so this other question is coming. Can you talk about how the "be like us" mindset in America's family policing system impacts under-resourced parents from Black communities?
I'm sorry. The being like us, I don't think I've heard.
Yeah, it says "be like us" in mindset in America's family policing system impacts under-resourced parents from Black communities. I don't know if I don't know if I am familiar with the "be like us" mindset, and it sounds
I
like
don't
maybe
I
you're,
Yeah, I don't think I can. So if someone can explain that, then I can answer it. But right now I don't
yeah.
think I can answer that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, what advice do you have for clinicians of the global majority who want to build community with each other, begin healing from whiteness in their training, healing from ongoing racism they experience in their workplaces? And what about for folks who want to pursue work in psychology outside of the colonized academic system?
Yeah. So what I would say is that for us who are, in the Eurocentric path of psychology and mental health, connect with the ethnic, cultural, professional organizations. They're out there. So connect with them. Some of them are more you know, culturally determined than others, but they're out there. Another thing I would say is don't silo yourself to only mental health spaces. If you want to connect with cultural and ancient indigenous ways of healing, move beyond just the mental health space because so many other communities of professionals and healers are doing this work and have been doing this work. And third, I would say reach out. Like, don't be afraid to cold email or cold call someone. Like, I recently went into full-time private practice after being in academia for years. And one of the things that I did uh, early on was I went to my trusty friend Google and I looked up other Black psychologists.
Mm.
And I sent them emails and I said, I'm new and I want to create community. I think, we might be able to support each other. And everyone, of course, there were people who didn't respond, but some did. And we're still in touch. And now we have a community. Yeah. And for
Yeah.
people, that second part of that question, people who want to not go the academic route, again,
Mhm.
there's so many different healing traditions. And in today's world, I mean, you may not be able to take insurance, but if you're not worried about that, there's so many different avenues. There's so many ways that you could help people. Whatever you do, though, I do encourage you to make sure that you are taking that training seriously because again it doesn't need to be the Eurocentric training. However, even in indigenous cultures there's years of training and apprenticeship to ensure that people have the skill, the ethics, and the empathy to do that work of healing. The work of healing is very important. It is rigorous. It is so don't think, oh, I can just go out here and start, right? Get
Hmm.
some sort of skill or training under your belt.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think really kind of what I'm hearing you speak to is really kind of adhering to whatever that training is, and really honoring that within that framework, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm coming back to this question that we just had earlier, just because it was broken down a little bit, this concept of be like us. So I'm just going to repeat the question again and then maybe I'll explain the concept first and then I'll repeat the question again. So this be like us mindset regarding historically marginalized communities being pit against one another to be more like white communities, right? In the face of scarcity, right? Within that. So this question again was asking, um, can you talk about how the Be Like Us mindset in America's family system impacts under-resourced parents from Black communities, right? And
Okay.
yeah.
I'm going to attempt to answer
Mhm.
that question, and I hope I do it justice. So if I'm understanding right, to be like us is saying be like us white people, right?
Yeah.
Take on the whiteness mindset as your own. And how does that affect under-resourced parents? I think it affects under-resourced parents in a lot of different ways. I think part of it is affects them like it affected my father, right? You end up training your children to take on values, to take on ways of being that are not indigenous to your culture. You also may end up socializing your children into this individualistic way of being, only be concerned about yourself. And if someone doesn't have it, it's because they're lazy and that's their fault. It also can affect parents by making them feel bad because they can't live up to those standards. Because the
Mhm.
one of the very harmful things and just flat out wicked, I should say, for lack of a better term,
Mhm.
things about the whiteness mindset is that it sort of sets up this paradigm and say, go after this, but then at the same time puts all these barriers in place. So it's very hard to have this. I mean, we even think about this with home ownership, right? So many
Right,
people
right.
can't even afford a house anymore, but that's the American dream, right? And so I think some parents internalize that and they start to have low self-worth and feel like they're not good parents because they can't be like us no matter how hard they try.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So thank you for coming back to that
Mhm.
question. We have another question coming that is asking, this person is saying that so grateful to listen to your story of resilience and success. As a mixed heritage African woman, I decided to leave after a year of school because of the covert and constant racism in my psychotherapy grad school, which was a predominantly white Buddhist university. I did this for my health while my heart was in grief. I'm still paying for it all. Do you have a recommendation for a diversified psychotherapy grad school that educates for multiple psychorealities and Black psychology?
One, I want to say, I'm so sorry. Again, no one deserves that. None of us deserve that. Again, this
Mhm.
story is way too common and none of us deserve it. Um, Two, unfortunately, I don't. I don't know. And again, that's part of how whiteness keeps its power is by limiting the alternatives. One of the things that the Association of Black Psychologists is trying to do, there's an initiative to have these ethnic psychology organizations and institutions be able to accredit their own, train
Mhm.
and accredit their own. Right now, everything has to go through the APA, which again is a PWI institution. I mean, it's PWI,
Yeah.
and it is based in Eurocentricity. I mean, there are some initiatives to diversify, but they're diversifying into the whiteness mindset.
Right.
Right. It is not presenting an alternative paradigm. And so unfortunately, yeah, I don't know of any.
Hmm.
If people do know, please share it because I want to start sharing if they are out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I mean, I know I work here at CIIS, but I feel like we are an institution that really tries to embody um, these various ways of healing. And
Mhm.
so, I would encourage you all to, if you're someone who is interested in re-entering into a program, to look at our programs, go to info sessions, right? That could be an opportunity to learn about the training here. And so, but yeah, it is. And I guess what I would say is that this program is also unique in that we don't hold adhere to APA. And I think that's what allows for some of that freedom within the training there. But we have another question coming through. What were some things you learned during your writing process that you weren't able to weave um, into this book? And what would you like your next book project to be about? Do you know?
Yes, so thank you for that question. So the first part of my answer to the first part of that question is looking there was originally there are 12 chapters to it, but there was originally 17. Five got cut. And one of those chapters was about what the whiteness mindset looks like in the therapy room and my
Mm,
experience of treating a client who was perpetuated a lot of racial microaggressions. He was like, "Oh yeah, my family owned slaves. Oh, I'm. Have you seen the movie The Blind Side? I'm Sandra Bernhardt. Like all of this white savior film." And I'm like, "You do know I'm black, right? You can see.
hmm
Like, why are you
hmm
telling me all of this stuff?" But again, eventually, I figured out, oh, this is the whiteness mindset at play. So I want to be able to explore that in future projects. What does that look like in the therapy room, and how we might address it clinically and directly instead of just sort of skirting around it. And that leads into the next book. First, please buy this book because
Yes, yes.
because it don't I heard some people say I'm getting it from the library. I love libraries. However, the publishing industry is about money. It's a capitalistic industry, and they do not allow you to write another book unless they think your first book sells. So we all hate capitalism, but please buy the book so that I can write this next book. And so the next book, again, I want it to be more of an emphasis on the solution or strategies to push
Mhm.
against this whiteness mindset. So in this book, I really wanted to define the whiteness mindset and to really detail how it harms us. In the next book, I want to focus in more on the healing from the whiteness mindset.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
It's such a great question, because I think it also um, we don't have many resources around what it is to be a therapist of the global majority and either working, with other global majority populations or working with white folks
Mhm.
and what occurs there, right? I feel like a lot of that knowledge is knowledge that's handed down through supervision or some sort of training orally.
Mhm.
Um, but the actual references for that are limited there.
Mhm.
So this was our last question for the evening. We made it. We're gonna buy your book because we're supporting Black authors, Black businesses, right? I want to just thank you for again your vulnerability and sharing these stories with us, and for your time with us this evening. And we will close out. Thank you all for attending this discussion and offering your questions. And we hope to get your sales up so that you can continue to move forward with your work.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you so much.